Long ago, the Seneca lived and died on the banks of a small creek surrounded by towering evergreen trees. These gentle people called the area Ganadawayo, which means among the Hemlocks. Today, these waters are called Canadaway Creek, and the surrounding area is the small village of Fredonia, New York State, located just 34 miles from Buffalo. At the turn of the 19th century, this picturesque area was a destination to a great many settlers from all over the world. In 1803, Senator Mitchell had originally proposed Fredonia to be the proper, more poetic name for the United States.
The land occupied by the United States should be called Freedone, or Fredonia. People would be called Fredonians or Freeds. The adjectival form would be Friedish.
Around 1816, the name Fredonia caught the fancy of some Canadaway Creek residents. 13 years later, on May 2, 1829, the village of Fredonia was incorporated. However, by this time, the village was already on the map for something much more important than a name. Four years earlier, in 1825, a local gunsmith, William Hart, noticed some youngsters burning gas that was bubbling on Canadaway Creek. He became intrigued.
I used my wife's wash tub to trap the gas over the creek, drilling a hole in the tub, placing a gun barrel in the hole, and lighting the gas.
This led Hart to dig the first commercial gas well in the United States. Hart dug the well along the northeast margin of Canadaway Creek that is now the Main Street Bridge. This well had a simple gas meter and piped the natural gas to street lamps in Fredonia. These bright lights attracted travelers, often causing them to make a significant detour to see this new wonder. The well also supplied gas to the grist mill and 4 other buildings, including the tavern across Main Street where the Fredonia Fire Department now stands. Commemorating the well and these first 5 buildings, the village seal and the Department of Public Works depict a standard with 5 flaming gas lights. 30 years later, the Fredonia Gas, Light and Water Works Company was born. This company is a precursor to the billion-dollar energy corporation National Fuel, and William Hart is often considered the father of the American gas industry.
Very nice hat. Take aim! Fire! Take care. Shoulder your firework! Right about face!
While Hart was observing the gas bubbles in Canadaway Creek, General Lafayette was conducting a year-long triumphal tour around the United States. 40 years earlier, during the American Revolution, this French nobleman had led the troops alongside his close friend, George Washington. In the summer of 1825, Lafayette was traveling by carriage to Dunkirk to catch a steamship to Buffalo. Sometime after midnight, he was jolted awake by the sounds of artillery. Looking out, he saw thousands of small lights suspended from the surrounding houses and trees. Flag-waving Fredonians had gathered in the chilly night air to greet him. He was taken to the park in the center of the village and onto a large platform lighted by barrels of rosin. The rector of the Trinity Church, Reverend David Brown, gave a welcoming address to the Marquis de Lafayette. The band played amidst applause, and everyone was in their Sunday best. Sally Crosby lived on the corner of Main and Water Street that is now the National Bank. She lent her magnificent purple shawl and Tuscan bonnet to all the ladies who were presented to Lafayette.
My mother wore pink ribbons in her hair and put candles in every window of our home on West Main Street.
The village green was named Lafayette Park, but was renamed Barker Common in 1930. A grand reception for the general was held at the Able Hotel, and a plaque marking Lafayette's visit is located on the side of the building that is now called One Park Place. 9 years after the Fredonians thronged to see Lafayette, it was a Fredonian who would attract huge crowds for a bloody murder. Joseph Damon was part of the stonecutter family business. Along with his three brothers, they fashioned gravestones in Damon's tombstone factory. Joseph quarried the stone from the Damon quarry in nearby Leona. On the 24th of April, 1834, Doctors Walworth and Crosby were called to Joseph's farm on the old Chautauqua Road.
A terrible tragedy had been enacted. Damon's wife was found on a bed with face, hair, and pillows stiff with her clotted blood. A blood-smeared fire poker was unmistakable evidence of the instrument used to commit the horrible deed.
Joseph Damon was convicted of murder and sentenced to hang. It was to be a public execution, and the day made a general holiday. On foot, on horseback, and in wagons, 10,000 men, women, and children came to witness the scene. When Damon fell through the drop, the fastenings of the rope broke away, and Damon fell to the ground unscathed. Damon's appeal to the sheriff for mercy fell on deaf ears. The rope was readjusted, and the hanging was completed. This was the first and last public execution to take place in Chautauqua County.
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. See that host all dressed in white. God's gonna trouble the water. The leader looks like an Israelite. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
Baptist church members also included Dr. Eber Petit, who was noted for his Christian love for his fellow man. In 1868, Petit became the conductor on the Underground Railroad. This railroad had no paying customers and did not even use a train. It was a system by which runaway slaves from the South were transported to freedom in Canada. The shortest routes from the South to Canada were in the lines, and those who assisted the fleeing slaves were dubbed conductors, engineers, and trainmen. A major trunk line ran along Lake Erie shore from Cleveland to Buffalo. Eber's father aided many slaves to freedom in defiance of the fugitive slave laws. Introduced in 1850, this law imposed a fine of $1,000 for selling or giving away a meal or victuals to a fugitive. The Petit house was on the southeast corner of Madison and Chestnut Street. Dubbed the Cordova Station, the barn provided safe cover for slaves fleeing to the south.
As a small boy, I would go to the barn early in the morning to feed the cow. I would discover a Negro hiding there. During the day, food would be brought him from our house.
Songs were used to pass vital information from the conductors to the slaves. Map songs had directions coded into their lyrics. Wade in the water told slaves to get into the water to avoid being seen. Follow the drinking gourd suggests escaping in the spring as the days get longer. Other songs use biblical references as analogies of their own history of slavery. For a slave, being bound for the land of Canaan meant being ready to go to Canada. To avoid attention from unsympathetic neighbors, runaways were hidden during the day. At night, they were silently carried forward to their next station, where word of their coming had preceded them. It is estimated that around 30,000 slaves reached freedom because of the selfless acts of the Petit family and others. Dr. Eber Petit is buried in the Forest Hill Cemetery in Fredonia.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
In January 1870, while slaves were being secreted to safety, Mark Twain arrived in Fredonia to an enthusiastic reception. Famous for his humorous lectures, he delivered his Sandwich Island lecture at the Normal School chapter.
We did have a most delightful audience at Fredonia, and I was just as happy as the Lord from the first word of the lecture to the last.
2 weeks later, Twain married and became editor and co-owner of the Buffalo Courier. Although he lived in Buffalo, he moved his mother, his sister, and her children to Fredonia. The family rented the former Episcopalian rectory in Day Street, but moved to Temple Street and finally Central Avenue. Initially, Mark Twain was active in the community and even invested in the Fredonia Watch Company. The village even appears to have been the setting for Twain's short story, The Man Who Corrupted Hadleyburg. The physical traits such as the bank, Baptist and Episcopal churches invoke Fredonia's town square. Two characters, Dr. Harkness and the banker Pinkerton, are vivid enough to have been drawn from Fredonia residents. However, Twain left Fredonia in 1881, never to return. In 1830, there were 18 distilleries within the village limits, and Fredonian whiskey, free of taxes, was known as black strap. Americans over the age of 14 swallowed more than 7 gallons of whiskey a year.
The whiskey jug was thought an indispensable help in the harvest field and was ever present at house raisings, log rollings, and corn huskings. Liquor was bought by the gallon or the barrel and kept for daily use. Seated at the breakfast table, the glass was passed round to give an appetite. Bittered with some herb, it was a sovereign remedy.
The Women's Christian Temperance Union aimed to change all this. Although the American temperance movement dates back to colonial times, the growth of towns and cities fueled the emergence of the reform movements. On a wintry December evening in 1873, over 200 people crammed into the basement of the Fredonia Baptist Church. Pastor Lester Williams invited all the women to organize a movement with a prime objective: to prohibit the sale of intoxicating liquors. Just after midnight, 100 women left the church basement and marched across to the Taylor House Saloon. Reverend Williams' wife was at the head of the procession.
In the name of God and humanity, we make our appeal. The sale of liquor is the parent of every misery and prolific woe in this life and the next, blighting hope and desolating families, as well as the chief incentive to crime.
The saloon proprietor, Mr. D. Taylor, agreed.
If the rest close their places, then I will close mine.
Daily visits to all the liquor establishments continued during the week, and remarkably, all but one establishment agreed to close. A week later, Mrs. H.R. Stanford proposed the name for their movement, the Women's Christian Temperance Union of Fredonia.
I hereby solemnly pledge, God helping me, to abstain from all distilled, fermented, and malt liquors, including wine, beer, and cider, and to employ all proper means to discourage the use of and traffic in the same.
Esther McNeil became president of its chapter in 1877. Nicknamed Mother McNeil, she held this post for almost 20 years, helping the WCTU become a political force to be reckoned with. Although it took 45 years for the fruits of their labor to be recognized, the enactment of the 18th Amendment prohibited the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors. The fountain in Barker Commons is dedicated to Mother McNeil. A major consequence of creating a dry Fredonia was that men complained that they had no place to go. In April 1874, the WCTU funded a reading room for the public. Originally situated at Beck's newsstand opposite the Baptist Church, the reading room flourished and became the village public library. If Fredonia lives on in literature, then it is also immortalized on celluloid. The Marx Brothers' Duck Soup, released in 1933, is set in a fictional town of Fredonia. Some film critics consider the comedy to be the brothers' finest film. Faculty and students at the State University of New York celebrate the Marx Brothers' work at a popular event called Fredonia Marxonia. SUNY Fredonia is as old as the town itself. On October 4th, 1826, the first class was held at the Fredonia Academy with 8 students in attendance. The original site of the academy is where the village hall sits today. Student numbers soon grew, and the academy became known as the Normal School. During the winter of 1868, a new building was opened and was affectionately dubbed Old Main. This grand building dominated the corner of Temple and Central Avenue for almost 40 years until a catastrophe happened. Shortly before 6 a.m. on December 14, 1900, the school's janitor, Charles Gibbs, found smoke coming from the basement. Gibbs alerted the fire department and head janitor, Phineas T. Morris. Despite frantic rescue efforts, 6 young women died in the fire, along with Mr. Morris, and most of the school building was destroyed.
Nothing remains but the blackened walls and chimneys filled with charred and still blazing fragments of floors, ceilings, and woodwork. What is left is a wilderness of walls still steaming on the December snow.
The girls and Mr. Morris were buried together in Forest Hill Cemetery. Although the school was rebuilt by 1938, Old Main structure was deemed inadequate, so a new site was chosen, and this is still the location of SUNY Fredonia. Today the school is a bustling, thriving campus that embraces the pillar of the community engagement. Fall sweeps, freshening up the village commons, and cleaning up Canadaway Creek are just a few of the things the students and faculty participate in. The small village doubles in size during term time, and the revenue generating helps maintain the lifestyles of the Fredonians who continue to live among the Hemlocks.